Far more is happening behind the scenes in Pokémon than we could possibly know. Every ounce of the franchise has a story to tell that is far deeper than what we could imagine, and every Pokémon that we get to interact with in the games is just the tip of the iceberg compared to its full background and origin story. You see, as you can naturally imagine, but most often don't even think about, is that every single Pokémon is unique and original in its own sort of way, and therefore, someone had to have the idea to create it. Those ideas could come from an infinite number of sources, and therefore, it is likely that many Pokémon have some neat, interesting, or even downright fascinating stories to their name regarding their creation that we as fans don't get to learn anything about most of the time, due to that kind of stuff being development info that is largely kept behind a very big lock and key. But sometimes stuff slips out. Sometimes breadcrumbs are scattered throughout the series that could bake a pretty nice loaf of bread if enough of them were simply gathered together, and the loaf that I am interested in talking about today concerns Buizel. What you are about to hear is somewhat of a conspiracy theory concerning Buizel and its origin story. I acknowledge that the following is a fairly crazy idea, and there's definitely no hard proof at this time to conclusively verify the following claim as a fact, but there are, as I've said, breadcrumbs, and these breadcrumbs come together to make a first prize winning loaf of sourdough if I've ever seen one. So adhere yourself to your seats, ladies and gentlemen, and let me tell you a conspiracy theorist's tale about how Buizel came to be. Now, Buizel is a pretty unassuming Pokemon, so you might be wondering what in the Torterra's tater tots could be so interesting about a common, monotyped Sinnoh pocket monster. Well, what if I told you that Buizel's origins might begin with it as a starter Pokemon? That is quite the interesting scoop if you ask me, and it's a rabbit hole that I just couldn't resist climbing down. In fact, I mean rabbit hole quite literally here, because recently, the first link in this chain of a story was discovered when beta material from Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire's development days was leaked onto the internet, and one of the most interesting tidbits from that leak was this. Artwork of an early rendition of Hoenn's starter Pokemon, including an entirely different water starter. Now, aside from not being Mudkip, there is something else about this particular Pokemon that makes it pretty distinctive, and that is that it's wearing an inner tube. This obviously goes along with its water typing and is the kind of neat, charming little detail that had everyone eating this little guy up when he was first leaked. But when the dust settled, I began to notice something rather interesting about this cut Pokemon, and that is, it has a shocking amount of similarity to our friend Buizel from the Sinnoh region. To start, Buizel is a fairly unique Pokemon conceptually speaking, as it is essentially a mammalian Pokemon with a flotation device theme. It's got a little inner tube around its neck, and fins that are also meant to resemble little arm floaties on its arms. This obviously represents its status as a water type, and it is the exact same motif, practically to a T, that this cut water starter has. A small mammalian Pokemon based on a cutesy little animal that is water type and has a flotation device theme. As I mentioned, that general concept is fairly unique and original all on its own, so what are the odds that Game Freak used this exact same concept for a Pokemon in Generation 3, but then cut that Pokemon, and then used that exact same concept for Buizel in the very next generation? Now, you can probably see the picture I am painting here, because I believe it could be possible that Buizel as a Pokemon actually started out as a starter Pokemon in the form of this guy from Generation 3, and upon being cut, its concept was reworked and recycled for Buizel in Generation 4. That might be a big claim to make. I would even call it a bit of a conspiracy theory myself, as I have said, but as I've also said, there are some breadcrumbs here, and they are the type of breadcrumbs that fit together like the pieces of a delicious toasted whole grain puzzle. There are also some interesting supplementary pieces of evidence that work in the favor of this too. Like, for example, that Buizel was one of the first Sinnoh Pokemon revealed, and was in fact revealed early during the latter parts of Generation 3. This is consistent with this potential starter origin in a couple of different ways. Number one being that Buizel as a design was likely one of the earlier Gen 4 Pokemon that was created if it was able to be revealed and featured early, which makes sense if its whole concept was recycled from this Gen 3 starter. Number two, it was selected as a Pokemon to sort of market Gen 4 because it was obviously a Pokemon that Game Freak felt good about doing so, which also would make sense if it was based on the concept of a former starter Pokemon, who are very explicitly designed to be as appealing as possible. Furthermore, I would say it's also worth pointing out, for what it's worth, that the very first traditional bunny Pokemon outside of the Nidoran lines, who are more so like a kaiju kind of monster anyway, was also introduced in Generation 4 with Baniri and Lopunny, which could also suggest that Game Freak could have split the Water Bunny starter into two different Pokemon, one based on a bunny and the other one taking on the water-type flotation device theme. We have also seen Game Freak do similar things like this before, with cutting Pokemon and then bringing them back in later generations, and even splitting designs into two separate Pokemon, which they did in Gen 3 with the Latias Blaziken beta Pokemon. So I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm even happy to address it as a conspiracy theory because I know it's kind of wild. All I'm saying is, what are the odds that all of this lines up, especially regarding the designs of Buizel and the Water Rabbit, and it's all just a coincidence? It could be possible, but personally, I like the odds that there could be some kind of connection here. And that, my friends, is an example of the iceberg that is each and every Pokemon. There is most likely way more to most of them than we know, and many of them probably have amazing stories to tell just like this. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to leave a like and let me know your thoughts about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe as well, because I'll be back with another video very soon, and until then, as always, thanks so much for watching this one. I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.